Well, I left you in suspense yesterday with Jonah. We quickly ran through the book of Jonah and gave the storyline. But although I gave you the key verse, 2:9, salvation is from the Lord, I did not give you a key word. So I'm sure many of you spent hours upon hours worrying about this. So I'm going to remove the suspense very quickly. The key word is going to be appoint. It has been noticed by many for centuries that the Lord was absolutely in charge of every aspect of this short little story, just 4 chapters, and that he appointed a number of things for his purposes in this story. So it's going to be a point. We start out with the appointment of Jonah. Jonah himself is appointed by God to go and deliver a message. When Jonah refused, and he goes to get on this ship to head to Tarshish, in verse 4, it said, the Lord hurled a great wind on the sea. So the Lord appoints a wind. This is a storm on the sea that God sovereignly appoints to bring Jonah to the place where he recognized that he's going to die if he continues in his rebellion. So God appoints that great wind. The sailors then throw Jonah overboard. And certainly he's going to die. He's in the midst of a storm. There's no hope. I assume that's what Jonah assumed would happen when he was thrown overboard. But instead, God appoints, verse 17, a great fish to swallow Jonah. And this fish swallows him. Now, don't get too carried away with this. Over the centuries, people have tried to figure out how this is possible. They've tried to give us stories of other sailors who've been swallowed by fish or whales. They have come up with all sorts of ideas. Here's my opinion. The Lord not only appointed this fish, he created this fish. This was not your normal fish. Jonah could not have survived in any kind of fish for any length of time at all. And yet he's in here 3 days. I think this is a supernatural creation appointment by God. He made this fish for this occasion. That's my opinion. You can argue with me about that later, but that's what I think. So we have the appointment of this great fish. Jonah in chapter 2 prays. He comes to the place of repentance. He knows he's done wrong, and he finally says in verse 9 that salvation is from the Lord. And at that point, the Lord then appoints that same fish. He commands that fish, actually, to go and throw up Jonah on the dry land. So, same fish, a new command. He was to swallow Jonah. Now he throws him up. And so when he does that, Jonah is now on dry land, and he's headed to Nineveh, which was a multi-week, even couple of months travel by foot to get to Nineveh. But there he goes. He's headed in the right direction now. As we get to chapter 3, and after he preaches his great sermon there, and the people actually seem to have some form of repentance, we come to chapter 4, and we see another set of appointments by God when the people did not respond, or as Jonah wanted them to. He wanted them to be rebellious and continue in their arrogance, and God would have to judge them, as he had promised. But since they repented, Jonah now sits outside of Nineveh looking down upon it and is very upset about the whole thing. And so the Lord begins to appoint different things. In verse 4, he says to Jonah, do you have good reason to be angry? And Jonah said he did. And so in verse 6, so the Lord appointed a plant, and that plant grew over Jonah to shade his head, deliver him from his discomfort, and Jonah was extremely happy about the plant. So now the Lord appoints a plant, and it gives shade to Jonah. How did it grow so quickly? The same way the great fish swallowed him. God created a very special plant, I think. Then he creates or appoints a worm in verse 7, but God appointed a worm when dawn came the next day, and it attacked the plant and it withered. So this supernatural worm, I think, did something to this plant so quickly and so powerfully that the plant withered. So he is now appointed a worm. But then in verse 8, he appoints another wind. And when the sun came up, God appointed a scorching west or east wind. Now he had appointed a wind earlier on the sea that brought about a shipwreck almost. This is a different wind, and it's a scorching wind that just withers Jonah as he sits there. He doesn't have the plant any longer to give him shade. And so this worm has destroyed his plant and his shade, and now that wind just whips up that terribly dry desert heat, and he is just coming to the end of his life almost here. Why does God do all this? In his sovereign decree, he has appointed all things to follow him and obey him. It's been well noted by many that everything the Lord appointed in this book, except for Jonah, immediately obeyed. Only Jonah didn't. That shouldn't be our hearts, folks. Our hearts should be that we too obey him as he appoints our way going forward. So Jonah's a great book. We spent 2 weeks on it. The key word is appoint, and the key verse is salvation is from the Lord. May God give you his special blessings this weekend as you contemplate these things.